Hi. I had a wonderful lady email me. She contacted me and asked if I would cover the topic about self-image. And I thought that was great. And I think we need to talk about self-image a little bit. Self-image, did you know, is kind of one of the foundations of self-esteem and self-worth. And I want to discuss where self-image begins. How do we develop a self-image? And I think you can understand when I say that some people fake a self-image. They fake an image. And I think maybe we all have at one point or another, because we're trying to figure out who we are. How do we fit in? Where do we fit in? So I am going to start at the beginning. And if you know me and you've seen some of these other videos I've done over the past, maybe about 9 months on this channel, I went live last year, twice a week, and covered so much the topic of personal growth and trauma in childhood, and how do we operate as human beings? What can we do when we are traumatized? Talk about self-awareness and spiritual awareness and all kinds of things. So I hope you have a chance to go back and look at some of those videos under the live section. I know it's not a fancy channel, but I do want to share the best things that I know that have helped me and others in this life. Yeah, we need a village, don't we? It does take a village to help us through. So anyway, let's get back to the subject of self-image. It starts when we're very young. I mean, we come into the world as infants, obviously. Some people go, it's a blank slate. Not quite, because we are wired a certain way. We are wired to have a certain type of personality one way or another. But it's true, our environment, the nurturing part, you hear the phrase nature nurture, the nature being how do we come into the world, and the nurturing is how do we grow up? What are the experiences we have? So, as babies and infants, we come in the world, most babies, depending on their little personalities, are just trying to figure it out. The little brains are working very hard to take in experiences and feelings and emotions and smells, and eyes are adjusting, and then learning to use your limbs, and because otherwise they're flailing all over the place, right? When you see a little infant, and all that takes a lot of energy. And then there comes a time when, especially when eyesight is really good and they have their ability to pick things up and check them out, begin to crawl and explore, and then pull themselves up and then begin to toddle around. There's a lot of exploration to do, and they're very, very curious. So children come into the world, we all do, with curiosity and an excitement for it. And, toddlers are very persistent little people, right? They don't really want to take no for an answer. And they'll be glad to tell you no, because at around age 2-ish, they develop a sense of autonomy. They realize they're separate from the mom or the dad or the caregiver, whoever, usually the mom, and they can say no themselves. You might be giving them a little toy and they're like, no, it's like, I don't want that one. They're not going to say, I don't want that one, but they're going to reject it. Or you try to give them green beans and they're like, oh, heck no, no. So it's the beginning of autonomy for a child when we are about 2, let's say, give or take a few months. And we realize to some degree or another, there are little choices that can be made. And we realize in some way we are our own person. It's not something you think about, it's what you experience though. Obviously, we still need mom and dad. We still need our caregivers, obviously, but there is that separateness as well, and trying to feel into that. And there's an understanding through experience that, oh, these people are close to me. They want me to call them mama and dada. Okay. And then these people in their little lives are the ones doing all the caregiving and loving and nurturing and feeding them, clothing them, tickling them, going for walks, bathing them, all the necessary nurturing, the proper nurturing a child needs. And that becomes their attachment. Children need a strong, trusting, loving, caring attachment to their parents. That's half of, or almost all of, what it means to be a well-adjusted person. And so, in many homes, that's not always the case. But let's split it up to two scenarios, okay? Let's say here you have this young family, and the parents are well-adjusted, and they're well-educated, and they love their children, and they're caring for them and making sure they're eating well and getting the nutrients they need, and loving and bathing and guiding them and playing with them, all the things that a young life needs in the beginning. Not perfect, let's say, but to the best of these parents' ability. And that child, it doesn't mean they're not going to fall off their tricycle and skin their knee, or when they get older, they have a little heartbreak in high school or whatever else, but because those are just normal, natural things in life. But you see, the difference is they have the support, they have love and support with their families and those around them. So when things kind of go awry or they're hurting, they've built up this good attachment to the parents to be able to go to them and talk to them and share with them what's going on. They're not afraid to be open with their parents. For the most part. I think teen years, yeah, everybody's going to keep a secret or two. It's not like that. But I mean, in the thick of it, they know they can call mom or dad and in a tough time, and they're going to be heard and supported and guided in the right way, okay? Best case scenario. Well, that child's going to grow up to be pretty well adjusted. Their self-image is going to be strong because they know they're well loved, well taken care of. They know because they've been supported and nurtured in their abilities. Let's say piano lessons, and they're doing really well, or a certain sport, or an instrument they want to play, and they get the support that they need, and they get the compliments and the encouragement. So, and they've been supported enough to know that they can work through a difficult time. So they've built self-confidence as well. So that's a pretty well-adjusted person, right? They have pretty good self-confidence. I'm not saying perfect across the board, but I know people like that in my life. I've been with friends like that early on in my life. And it's a good thing. I mean, yeah, it's really good. And that's not to say difficult times aren't coming their way. I'm not saying that, because life is life. But they're more well-adjusted to get through times like that. They're not easily triggered by things. Okay, now the next scenario is you have a child coming into the world, and they aren't allowed to be even a baby. They're expected to be a little adult. The parents have no understanding about a baby brain or a toddler's brain or even a child's brain. They don't understand age-appropriate behavior and functions and experiences. So they're all over the map, and they might be addicted. One of them might be alcoholic. One of them is very codependent. One of them might be mentally ill, let's say. They have stuff going on in their lives that's really not great and never been attended to or corrected. And so they are responding to being a parent by neglecting the child or yelling at the child or abusing the child because they don't know what the heck they're doing. And maybe that was what happened to them, and they're just carrying on that dysfunctional default mode of living. And so that child is going to be affected, right? Wouldn't you say? You or me? I know I was. I'm talking about myself a lot in these videos because I use myself as an example, but I'm sure many can relate to how you grew up. Maybe there was a lot of chaos in your home. no discipline, or overly authoritarian, or just downright abusive, or one parent just wasn't around or left the family, or whatever, all the other scenarios I talked about. That is definitely going to affect a child. They aren't getting the support they needed, or the nurturing, or the decent guidance. And perhaps they're being expected to be these little adults to remember everything. And a child's brain doesn't remember everything. They're not. They can't to most degree. That's why we help them over and over until it becomes a part of their pattern in life, like brushing your teeth, having to learn to go potty, a nighttime routine. That all takes patience and time, right? But some parents just think they should know. I told them once before and they just should know everything. And the child gets yelled at or shamed. And when there's just nonsense going on in a family, when there's just downright abuse or neglect with a child, you're dealing with the child mind. And a child isn't going to know. They know in a certain time frame that they're a part of this family, right? These are people I call mom and dad. And this is my family. And these are my siblings, or my pet, or those are my grandparents, whatever. But you begin to understand that you're part of this tribe. You don't use that language, but you know that's where you are and where you belong, whether you may like it or not, but that's it. And the self-image begins to take hold even at a very young age. When you're loved and supported and cared about, and you're learning empathy, because when you do fall and scrape your knee, there's attention to that, and there's some love and affection about it, and they clean it up and put a Band-Aid on and then send you out to play, but you feel protected and loved by that. That's maybe not often the case for some kids. So they don't experience that connection and that healthy attachment to their parents or caregivers. So they're on their own. Kids, when we suffer, we're on our own. There aren't other adults around us seeing what's happening, obviously, or maybe they do and they don't do anything, which is a whole other issue, but you're on your own. And so we have to come up with a way of surviving and coping with what's going on. And I know in my other videos, I've talked about the brain, and I've talked about the default mode of the brain and the part of the brain back here, which is what people call lizard brain, or the primitive part of the brain, where it's all about survival, keeping you safe, keeping you in a comfort zone, in fact, but keeping you safe. So we'll develop coping mechanisms to deal with what's going on in the house. And our self-image becomes bruised. And we begin, it's like a snapshot. When the word image, we think of it like a picture. It's a picture of a moment in time that becomes permanent. So when these difficult things are happening, and we're children, we don't know what we're doing or how to cope with it, or we're scared, we're not sure. And depending on our personality, how we're going to cope with it. So the image we create for ourselves is not great. Because oftentimes a child will just feel, without even thinking, I must not be good enough. I'm not smart enough. My parents don't even like me. And then you've heard me talk about the coping mechanisms we develop under these stresses, right? Some kids might become an overperformer and has to get all A's, and they work and work hard and study in order to make their parents happy, and they are completely miserable. Or the child, again, depending on their personality, might become the rebellious kid. Like, you can't tell me what to do. Don't, you're not my boss, and they grow up and take that with them, and like, I hate authority, they become people who are completely not knowledgeable about the balance of life. Now, it doesn't mean you have to always agree with authority. I'm not saying that, but they just have an outright, just whatever they might perceive as authority, or somebody telling them how to live or what to do, it's like they just blast against it, because that was their coping mechanism, and it got embedded in them, and they take it into adulthood. This is what we do, because our self-image depends on some of these behaviors because they got us through. Now, the self-image is part of our self-esteem and our self-worth. In fact, it's one of the foundations of self-esteem and self-worth. So depending on what the image is of you, of yourself, and there are going to be a lot of different images of yourself over time, what that image will do, the self-image and what we think about ourselves, what we think we look like to others, how we act or react, where we put emphasis on ourselves. Maybe we're very, very smart and we just push into that, or maybe you've overcompensate, and one of the coping mechanisms is to be very sexual, overtly so, thinking that's the only way you can get attention. Or maybe becoming the wallflower, and just not only are you an introvert, but you just are like, you don't want to be around anybody. It's hard for you to be in even a small gathering. You just want to shrink because you don't feel like you measure up, or you're not smart enough to talk to people. These images, these snapshots in life, especially when we're younger, are what creates the thoughts and feelings that we have about ourselves. Now, I want to connect the dots with this too, because you've heard me talk about, again, in other videos, is that when we are triggered, especially in relationships, all this comes out in relationships, friendships, coworkers, especially intimate relationships. All that stuff's going to come up if it's never been dealt with. And we'll be triggered and we'll react. And our partner might not like what's going on here? They're like kind of stunned because they didn't think they said or did anything wrong, but someone might be triggered by something. The trigger is that wounded child within you. It hit that nerve, right? Whatever the trigger was, whatever, it's going to be different for different people, but it hit that nerve, that tender spot of the child inside you that's hurt and wounded, and it's hitting that emotional growth. Let's say you're 7 years old and you're stuck at that point and you don't know how to respond well as an adult, so that it's the 7-year-old that comes back and flails and yells and how dare you and how could you and all this other stuff. Or you just want to go retreat and not talk about anything. And especially if you've seen the video before about how adults get together, you get two very dysfunctional adults triggering each other to craziness. That's what happens if we don't take care of our past issues. And sometimes we don't even know what's there until we hit up against life. And that's when I've said many times, pain is our teacher. I know in my life, there's so many things I know I wouldn't want to go back to. I wouldn't want to relive because they were so painful. But if I hadn't gone through those times, I wouldn't have gotten the help I needed, and I wouldn't have grown. I wouldn't have had this insight. I wouldn't have been able to heal that part of myself, that child, that part of the child within me that was really wounded and easily triggered. And that can happen. We can heal. We don't have to be triggered because of a snapshot of a certain self-image that's stuck in our subconscious. And we can learn to contain and or control. Like if we feel it coming on, we can understand it and then respond accordingly. Now, I know I'm talking in very general terms, and I know that every couple is different and every family is different, But I wanted to give you an overview, and I have more to share on this subject. So look for part 2, because self-image is something we need to understand more fully, because we can talk about self-worth, but if our image isn't that great of ourselves, if we think or are convinced we're not good enough, smart enough, skinny enough, pretty enough, handsome enough, then whatever enough, which are all shame-based statements about ourselves, if those things are deeply ingrained in us and they come out one way or another, and we believe it to where it's consciously competent, and excuse me, and I'll go over that as well, conscious incompetence and competence, okay? And conscious incompetence and conscious competence, okay? Because those are really important to understand. But at this point, I'm just gonna leave it here for now, because I wanted to give you a snapshot, no pun intended, of an image of what self-image is and where it comes from. And one more thing is, I know innately when we're young and things might feel chaotic and out of sorts, and please excuse me, tickle in my throat, and there's confusion and we're not sure where we fit in this tribe we call family. There's a sense of confusion, but I have a feeling innately you might have felt that still small voice let you know that it's better than this. It can be better than this. Because we experience it in life, right? We see it in other people, other friendships, families. But we just know, we feel it innately, like, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. And we need to look at that. What is that? And I want to talk about that. I'm going to go further into that. But thank you for listening for now. And I'm so glad that this wonderful person emailed me and asked me about this subject, because I think it's important to understand. Because this is the foundation of self-worth and self-esteem. It's how you imagine yourself to be. And where did those images and snapshots come from that created this self-image? So thank you for listening. I'll be back. And don't forget, and I mean this with my whole heart, you are an amazing human being. You're a miracle on this planet, and you truly matter. So thanks for being here, and look for part 2. And again, if you don't mind, like and subscribe to this channel. It's all for good. That's all I can say. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye for now.